All right, our next storyteller is Mr. Jim Meltzer. He is a native of Minnesota and has been living in Colorado Springs for the past 3 years. He majored in journalism at the University of Minnesota, has been an advertising writer for the past 40 years. He and his wife, Chris, enjoy traveling around the country in their 18-foot Coleman trailer and Taco Thursdays at Oscars on South Tejon. The title of Jim's story is Sweet Corn.
Can you hear me? A long, long time ago on a small farm in southern Minnesota, there was a mommy, a daddy, and 4 tow-headed little boys. My mother's name was Audrey, my dad's name was Gerald, and my older brothers were Daryl, Dale, and Howard. And so I was the youngest of 4 boys, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Like a lot of farms back in those days, we raised a lot of things besides boys. We raised chickens, we raised sheep, we raised hogs, we raised beef cows, and we raised dairy cows. And we also planted, of course, a lot of crops, and we planted corn and soybeans and alfalfa and oats and rye. And then every spring after the regular planting was done, my dad would plant 4 100-foot rows of glorious golden Minnesota sweet corn. And you might say it was sweet corn from the valley of the Jolly Ho 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 Green Giant because we lived pretty close to there. But the Green Giant didn't get any of our corn because it went to all us boys and our pigs. And maybe I remember our sweet corn extravaganzas more than my older brothers because I was involved in the preparation more than they were. And that's because I was the youngest of 4 boys. And my mom drafted me to do a lot of things like preparing sweet corn. I helped in the house, and I dusted, and I cleaned, and I folded the laundry, and I also cleaned the bathroom. And how she ever tricked me into that, I'll never know. But when you have 5 men in a house and 1 bathroom, that's not the task you want to help out with. But I was young and dumb, and now I keep a pretty good bathroom. But anyways, it seemed like every summer around the middle of July, when the sweet corn was ripe, that's all we ate for what seemed like 3 or 4 weeks. And it all started with going out to the field to get the sweet corn. Now, my mom and I would get our red coaster wagon and we'd get some brown paper grocery bags, and out to the field we'd go. And we'd pick 35 or 40 ears of corn because when we had our sweet corn suppers, that's all we ate. So we would husk the corn, and then we'd bring it back to the house, and then we would take the silk off. And my mom was always very particular about the silk because if you were going to boil 30 or 40 ears of corn, you didn't want to end up with a big boiling pot full of corn silk. So we got that off really well. And then the last part of the effort was to cut off the uneven ends. And my mom did that until I was quite old because it involved a quite dangerous, large butcher knife. And so I didn't get to use that till I was well into my teens. And so after we got the corn clean, then we started the water to boil. And while the water was boiling, then we set the table. And setting the table for our sweet corn suppers was not like setting the table for any other meal, because all we were going to eat was sweet corn. So the first thing we did is we laid out 2 or 3 layers of newspaper. And then we went to the cupboard and we got 6 little bowls. And each bowl we put about a half a stick of butter. Maybe a stick, I don't know. And then we'd mix in a little salt and we'd mix in a little pepper so every person got their little dipping bowl. And then we'd put a knife besides each bowl, and that was it. The table was set. And then we'd start the water to boiling, and then we'd put in the corn, and then 4 or 5 minutes later, we'd call my dad and my brothers to the table, and we'd pray, and we'd thank God for our sweet corn and for everything else that our farm brought us and for our family. And then for the next hour, it was nothing but elbows and forearms all over that table, and butter from nose to toes. And we ate sweet corn, and we ate sweet corn, and we ate sweet corn. My dad could maybe eat 6 or 8 ears of corn, and my older brother's 5 or 6 ears of corn, and my next oldest brother and I 4 or 5 ears of corn. And I don't remember if my mom ate anything. She was so busy as usual taking care of us and cooking, and I suppose somewhere along the line she had something to eat. And it was great fun. We didn't know any better, and we thought it was wonderful, and the food was great. But even when we were done eating, the fun wasn't over, because then we took the naked ears of corn and we put them back in the grocery bags, and we put them back in the coaster wagon, and we went down to the hog barn. And about this time of the year, the expectant mother pigs, the sows, were out in the pasture. So they would see us coming with this sweet corn, and they would run right up to the fence as fast as they could. And even though we weren't supposed to do it, we would sometimes take an ear of corn and fling it out, try to hit one of the old girls. And, if we did, and if they squealed, my dad would hear it, and when we got back to the house, we would catch royal hack. But it was fun. It was great fun. And, years later, I went, when I was working in Minneapolis, I suppose I was in my mid-20s or something. One summer day, one summer weekend, I came home and I bought a bag of a dozen ears of sweet corn at a roadside stand, and I brought it home and I put it on the kitchen table, and I said to my mother, "Do you remember when we used to eat so much sweet corn?" And she says, "Yes, I do." And I said, "That was such great fun, Mom. You made it such great fun, and we enjoyed ourselves, and we were well fed." And she said, "Well, I'm glad you thought it was fun, because, back then, if it wasn't for the sweet corn and the milk from our cows and the eggs from the chickens and the meat from our animals, I really don't know how I would have fed you kids." And then she said, and the other thing is, if we hadn't had all these things from the farm, we might have been on food stamps. And so every time I eat sweet corn, I think about that, and I think about all the things we had on the farm. And, it really makes me think about how well our parents took care of us and how we got by with what we had. And now, I shouldn't do this. It's not original, but since I'm from Minnesota, I thought I'd borrow a phrase from Minnesota's greatest storyteller to close this out. That's the news from Lake Hanska, where all the men are strong, all the women are good looking, and all the children are above average.
All right, our next story is Miss Mary Stonebeck. She is one of 3 triplets sisters. She's a deacon at Ascension. She's passionate about walking with and encouraging others in their faith journeys. She enjoys learning about and experiencing different spiritual practices. Her favorite pastimes include trumpet performance, videography, traveling, and having random conversations in coffee shops, right? Yeah. The title of Mary's story is By Accident.
Hello. So once upon a time, before Ascension, I was a child. Yes, thank you. You could say my life has been framed by accidents. It all began when my parents sold a piano business and was taking the spoils of that 6-year endeavor to head to seminary. They moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in married student housing at a Baptist college in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Dad, Ron, started school only to find that they were pregnant with a baby. Many people asked my parents at that time if it was an accident that they were going to have a baby, given their circumstances. My parents laughed at the suggestion and said, "A gift from God is a gift from God." So after calculating their situation, they decided that the birth of a child at that time was indeed not an accident and exciting news. So together, my parents, Margie and Ron, pressed forward into the summer classes while Dad accepted a job as a choir director and youth director at Augustana Lutheran Church in Sioux Falls. Mom thought all along she would teach special education in the Sioux Falls school districts, and Dad worked at the church and took classes. As the summer continued, however, Mom grew and grew and grew to the point where the maternity clothes would no longer fit her. She was becoming so large that she was experiencing difficulty walking and moving about without great discomfort, and a list of medical issues. An ultrasound showed 2 babies in the womb. My dad said at the time, "2 doesn't sound right. I think there are 3. Mom was reduced to complete bed rest, and Dad took an extra job teaching at instrumental pedagogy at the college where he was attending. Now, perhaps we were not necessarily completely planned. After all, they had sold a business, moved all their belongings to a 3rd-floor apartment, and found themselves in the fight for the life of 2 very frail human beings. Long story short, my sisters and I were born on October 20th, 1981. And the 1-bedroom apartment that my mom and dad had blindly taken over the phone before moving to Sioux Falls turned out to be on campus, only 2 blocks from one hospital for nearly 500 miles that housed a neonatal intensive care unit. There with the loving hands of godly directed physicians and nurses, my sisters and I took our first breaths. Now, although we were born by C-section, I am certain, it is no mistake, that I, taking the role of head engineer and being the natural leader that I am, was taken from the womb first. Thus, I became known as baby number 1. Bear in mind, the ultrasound had only shown 2 babies in the womb. So imagine the surprise in the delivery room when they discovered a 3rd baby hiding behind my sister and I. The doctor yelled out, "There's a 3rd one!" In return, my father, from behind his mask, yelled, "I know, that's no accident, thanks be to God." Since that day, there have been many moments of joy and challenge. I have watched my parents demonstrate love to each other and my sisters and I through the great times and the not-so-great times. My sisters and I grew up as best friends. We experienced much of life together. We cut our teeth on the same day, and we joke that we paid for our orthodontist's backyard pool. That's probably true. Our parents said we had our own language as toddlers, and for much of my life, I spoke in a plural tense. Fast forward to May of 2008, my triplet sisters, Kristen, Sarah, and I were preparing for life changes. In just a few months, I would leave for seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Sarah was heading to Boulder for her master's degree, and Kristen to CSU in Fort Collins to do the same and eventually continue further in the Army. It was the first time in our 25 years of life that we would be in separate places doing completely different things. Although we enjoyed different hobbies growing up, my sisters and I had several shared interests, including music. We were very close friends. We grew up surrounded by music. Our grandpa played in the Marine Band, Dad played trumpet and top band, and Mom played French horn and piano. They even met in band. When it came time to choose an instrument, we jumped at the chance to play trumpet. We started practicing up to 6 or more hours a day, and our parents would give us movie tickets to get us out of the house occasionally. Whether playing alone or as a family, we just couldn't get enough of it. It was our passion and our joy. And as a family, we began to play more in churches of all denominations, nursing homes, and trumpet conferences. Being triplets and playing trumpet, we admit, has a built-in draw. I just spoke plurally. There is no shortage of interest from the media. One of my favorite headlines over the years was "Trumpeting Triplets Toil Terrifically." Regardless of that headline and the anticipation of something cute, my dad would always say to us, "A curious audience is one thing, and they may come with expectations to see cool or cute triplets, but if by the second note they don't forget that we are a family, we have not come ready to play for them." He would say, "Always play in a way that they forget your triplets and let God shine through the sounds." So throughout our growing years, we continued to hone our craft, and in our senior year of high school at Interlochen Arts Academy and in college as trumpet performance majors at Arizona State University. After graduation, we went into business and traveled full-time as a professional brass group. We soloed as a trumpet trio with nationally and internationally renowned orchestras and were sponsored by Bach Consulmer, the company that built our instruments. We knew that our time on the road performing together as a family was for a time, and eventually we would each continue to discern where God was calling us. Still, the changes ahead felt monumental, and my sisters and I struggled with the feeling that we were breaking up the band. A trust is established that exceeds a family connection when you play in front of thousands of people in high-pressure situations. What would life be like apart? Would we ever play again? These questions and more occupied our minds that spring as we prepared to navigate the upcoming changes. Then, May 5th, 2008 happened. It was a beautiful day in Westminster, Colorado. My family and I were returning home from a family gathering in Brighton, Colorado. And then about 2 blocks from home, my sisters and I unbuckled and sat together on the middle seat. Before we knew it, the smiles and carefree conversation changed. Out of nowhere, Dad said in a calm and deliberate voice, "Everybody relax, we're going to be hit." To which I looked to my right and saw an SUV coming toward me. We were T-boned by a man driving under the influence, and he had run the stop sign going about 65 miles per hour. Our van flipped 2.5 times and finally landed on the roof. My 2 sisters landed in the front, where their bodies left imprints on the front windshield, and I landed in the back of the vehicle and woke up on the side of the street to see my parents standing where my sisters were lying. First responders, this was what the first responders shared with us when they came upon the scene. They were very nervous, but fortunately, their nerves was subsided when they figured out it was leftover salsa that they saw. We had been blessed to escape with whiplash and stitches. May 5th was a turning point for my family because of what we learned from that accident. If an accident could happen when we were together, 2 blocks from home, then surely we could not control the changes ahead as we went in our separate directions. I recognize this could have been a much different story had there been any worse injuries or fatalities, but by the grace of God, that is not a part of this story. So a few months later, I headed to St. Paul to begin my next chapter. A few months after that, my family and I were featured artists at a Christmas at Wooddale in Eden Prairie, alongside Minnesota Symphony players. To our amazement, the band had not broken up, and opportunities to perform continue yet today. I remember during the time of the car accident, everything felt as if it had been turned upside down, and for a series of seconds, my whole world was in slow motion, and I could see my life in an instant. The unspoken but looming thought of the inevitable family separation was punctuated by the occurrence of that May 5th accident. There were changes ahead. However, what we thought was ending eventually became another beginning. God guided us as we moved forward into these new experiences, and with the passing of time, I could see by accident, we all learned to trust God again and again. As I said in the beginning, once upon a time, I was a child. By the grace of God, in the body of Christ, I still am.
Our last storyteller tonight is Jeff Courtwright. He was born in Indiana's largest town and was the smallest kid in his class. He has been in Colorado since the U-Haul brought him here in 1981. He is a carpenter, the second oldest profession, and he works at Planet Granite as their safety coordinator. They have 7 grandchildren here and in Minneapolis. The title of his story is A Small Boy in a Big Catholic School.
Thank you, Sylvia, for getting me out of my comfort zone. I don't like talking in front of audiences. Had a couple of sleepless nights this week getting ready, and thank you for doing that. Before I get started, thank you everybody for being here. And I heard some news this week. There was a news clip that said 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And listen to Jim's story, coming from a large family, 11 kids. We ate a lot of sweet corn. And I really understood that story. But a lot of us know in the news there's a lot of people didn't get their paychecks today. And that food pantry out there is going to help them. And working construction all my life, I've used that pantry. Because there's been weeks when the snow came, construction jobs shut down, and there wasn't enough food for the family. And thank you guys for donating. But anyways, okay, so come from a family of 11 kids, and good Catholic family, and didn't know we were poor. You don't realize you're poor until you look back, and eating corn like Jim's family did. We got through it, but. All of us kids went to the Catholic school in town, and I don't know how Mom and Dad afforded it, but we were all sent there. And I was number 5 out of the 11, so the middle child syndrome or whatever they call that. And hopefully, if we have any psychologists in the group here, if you want me to lay down on the couch, I'll go ahead and tell you the whole story. And but take notes here, because. Maybe you'd help me. But being the middle kid, I had my older brother and sisters going to this Catholic school. And, of course, the nuns ran that place. And I still remember my brothers and sisters saying, we go to the laboratory twice a day at school. And I'm like, a laboratory, this is going to be great. You get test tubes. You're going to have Bunsen burners. And you got this and that. And so I could not wait for that first day of school. And I get there, and right away, the bell rings, and you sit down, and all of a sudden there came another bell, and it's time for the laboratory. Evidently, my hearing wasn't that good when I was that age. They said lavatory. And there we get marched down. 50 of us kids in this class. I don't know how the nuns dealt with us. There's 50 kids in every class. They marched us down, and we went into this bathroom, and there was a bank of urinals and a bank of toilets, and I'm like, where's the test tubes at? And so I was very disappointed my first day of school there. But I did learn to use the bathroom at a certain time every day. And speaking of that, okay, so the family of 11, there was 8 girls and 3 boys. And when you talk about bathrooms, and we had 1.5 baths in that house, you did learn to use that bathroom when that door was open. So whenever I see an open bathroom door, you probably saw it earlier here tonight, it was open, I'm going in. I'm going to use that because you don't know if you're going to be able to get back in. So, I wasn't a good student. My brother, older brothers and sisters, they set this path. I mean, my brother, spelling bee champ, A pluses, and that Iowa basics test, he had 99%. And here comes, little Jeff, and, I was small to start with. I didn't have good self-esteem, and I'm going through school, and I'm getting these report cards and getting these C's. And, back then, a C, and if you look down at the bottom of the card, a C was average. And I was an average kid, and my brothers and sisters, the older ones that went through school, were, A's, and what is that? Excellent, and I got to do something here. I'm not making it here. So I decided to check things out, and I did a lot of watching. I was a quiet kid in school, very quiet. I never spoke. The nuns had their rulers there. I knew my point, where I was supposed to be, my place, but I knew if I could get a little bit better grade in conduct, because they had the conduct and then your grade. And I go, I need to bring that C up. I can't do it, with this thing. So I'm going to have to try something else. So I did volunteer a lot to clean erasers, hang out. They go, we need altar boys. And I'm like, this is my chance. I could really get some brownie points and bring that conduct grade up, and at least that report card when Mom and Dad would spread them over that big kitchen table after they cleaned off the sweet corn, you'd be able to, I had an A in conduct, and I worked hard on that A, and so I kept quiet. I never spoke a word all through school. I just watched. I watched everybody, and I learned. So one of my, I guess, I'm not going to say it's a problem. I didn't do good at reading, My hearing was already bad. We already found that out. I couldn't hear laboratory or lavatory. But reading was a little tough for me. And so I worked hard at that. And, when you go to school and they want you to do this book reports. And, I go, wow, I got to do a book report. So this is about 3rd or 4th grade, and I'm like, man, I got to do good. I got to get that C. I got to get better in that C. So I would do a book report every year from 2nd grade all the way up to 8th grade on the book Go Dogs Go. A lot of people are confused, think Dr. Seuss did that. No, P.D. Eastman did that book. A lot of people get confused on that. But I would write, and they go, so what was the story about? And I go, well, it was, pretty good book. It had a good plot, and who was the main characters. And I go, well, you had this poodle that kept showing up, and this hat thing, and then at the end was always twisted. They end up at this dog party up in the. So I'd write this book report every year, and evidently the teachers must talk in the teachers' lounge because they found out that I was using the same book report every year, and finally I had to come up with something else. Another thing was hard, and again, nuns are running this school, and first thing they told me when I got to school, they go, if it feels good, it's bad. And I'm like, wow, my whole life is bad, and I'm probably going to hell, and and it's bad enough going to hell, but then being the smallest kid, you're just, there's a small guy and he's in hell, let's get him, and so I'm going through all this grief and stuff, and then they go, okay, well, it's time, lad, we're going to have First Communion's coming up, but before you go to First Communion, we can't have you taking communion if you're a sinner. So you got to go to confessions and confess all those sins you've done. And I'm like, gosh, I'm 2nd grade. I'm like, So I did some research, and I did, and I'm looking, and I went to my, catechism book, and I'm looking at the 10 Commandments, and I go, honor, God. Okay, I'm doing good with God, I think, and haven't used His name in vain. Didn't steal anything, and covered the neighbor's wife. What is they talking about? Covering the neighbor's wife, and I'm like, I deliver papers to her house. What am I doing? So I go through there, and I go through the checklist. I have nothing to tell this priest. And so I decide to make stuff up. And because he's going to want to hear something. So I'm in there, and I'm like, I punched my sister in the arm, and I'm really sorry about that. And he goes, oh, so you beat your sister up, huh? And I'm like, well, and I'm like, he goes, that's really bad. And I made this up, and I'm getting, just knocked down, and so the making up of sins didn't work in the confessional, and so get rid of it. Okay, so I went to confessions, confessed, made up a bunch of sins, got forgiven, and so now it's First Communion time, and of course my self-esteem's down there, and so they go, okay, everybody line up, and we're going to line up. You're going to line up for First Communion by height. I'm like, oh, no. So there I was. I don't like crowds. I don't like people. I'm very nervous. I get anxiety attacks. And what do? They put me, bam, right in front. You're going to march these 150 kids for First Communion. You're going to march in there, and you're going to lead them. And I'm like, no. Can I just, I think I grew a little bit since the last time you checked. And so we go through the First Communion thing, and I made it. Did the altar boy thing. Nothing happened. I mean, it was, I felt left out of that whole thing. I mean, you listen to all these stories, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? But it did help. I did plant a seed there, and that's another nice story about going to being an altar boy for 5:45 a.m. Mass. There at the Catholic school, they would make you had to fast before you went to communion. And midnight was the cutoff. You could not eat anything after midnight, and then you were allowed to go to communion the next day. And, I had a little bit of a sugar blood problem, I think, because I like to eat, and I like to eat all the time. And they cut me off at midnight. So my thing was, and that's why I go to 8 o'clock service here, because I get it over with. I need my food. I need my sugar. And so it was so interesting, so we'd have all these children packed into this basement of this Catholic church. It was 7:30 in the morning. None of them have eaten since they went to bed, and their sugar levels are low. And we would just, they'd make you stand. They were worse than Lutherans. They'd make you stand up, sit down, kneel, stand up, sit down. And you're going up, and you're getting these head rushes. And we had kids passing out just all over the place. And, of course, it was a tradition for the Courtright kids to pass out. It was sort of a rite of passage. And, of course, I did fourth grade, I think, is when I made it to fourth grade before I passed out in church. But, in fourth grade, I had this sister, this nun, Sister Humberta. And I really forgot what she looked like until Star Wars came out. And do you remember when the emperor that was, killing Luke Skywalker and shooting the electricity at him, and he had that hood and the rotten teeth that just go. That's where they got the character of Sister Humberta from. And she would, meanest teacher I ever had. And so anyways, one of the things I remember was we had this one kid. He had a beetle haircut, they called it back then. He had long, shaggy hair, and of course the Catholics didn't want long hair. You couldn't. That was the devil. And so this kid, I still remember Sister Humberta going up to him. He had just a Dutch bowl haircut, type thing. And she grabbed him in the middle of class and goes, "You look like a sheepdog." And she's shaking him, and don't you know you're gonna go to hell because you look like that. And I'm like, whoa, this is intense, you know. And that was, I remember that from 4th grade. A couple of years ago, I went back for my class reunion, 40 years, and I run into this kid, old Mark Ashman, and he goes, yeah, I don't remember much about you. And I go, nah, I don't remember much about you, except. And I told that story. I go, I remember when Sister Umberta grabbed you and shook you, and she called you a sheepdog, and you had long hair. And he goes, you remember that? And I'm like, oh, God, like it was yesterday. And he goes, I've been telling my therapist that story, and she doesn't believe me. She goes, can you call my therapist? And I'm, because she thinks I go, oh, no, it happened. It was real. Give me the phone. I'll call her right now. So it's a little trauma there in 4th grade. But again, you know, my reading wasn't very good. And again, gosh, you're being small, you're average student. And then they invent these things at school, the spelling bees. And they line you up in front of all your peers, and everybody's in the front of class, and they start throwing words at you. And of course, my brother, spelling bee champ, and you know, they go, whoa, you know, here comes the Courtright boy. I bet he's good at spelling. And I'm like, can I just give you a book report? Can I get out of this somehow? And there I was, and it just got to the point. They go, okay, everybody stand up for spelling bee, and I go, can I just sit down right now before I get embarrassed? But that was a tough time. But what was interesting is, you know, walking home from school, there was always something going on. We lived about a mile from the Catholic school, and be walking home, and I was always told, you walk home with your sister, keep her out of trouble. And she was a year older than me, and you know, we'd walk home and, you know, just kick a can on the way home and talk about this and that. And one day we go, hey, let's go. Instead of walking down the sidewalk, let's go down the alley. Maybe there's some garbage or something we can get into, you know, go garbage picking, right? And I guess it's a good show now, right? You know, pickers. Anyways, yeah. But so we're walking down the alley, and sure enough, out comes this bully kid. And it was just perfect example of that Christmas story where that kid comes out with the coonskin hat, and you know, and we're shaking in our boots, and this guy goes, you can't get by me until you give me some money. And I'm like, I'm not going to give you my money. I work too hard for that stuff, my paper route and stuff. He goes, you give me a dime, and I'll let you go see my zoo in my backyard. But you got to go to my zoo, and you got to give me a dime. I'm like, all right, fine. This is better than getting beat up. So this dude, you know, a mean kid, and he had this backyard, and he had all these animals. He'd catch them in traps and put them in cages, and he'd drag you over there, and, you know, for your 10 cents, he'd make you look at these animals, you know, and paws would be missing and stuff like that, and he'd bandage them up. And so, but he had all kinds of critters in there. I mean, it was sort of pretty cool, really. I just saw, I Googled him the other day. He has this show on National Geographic called My Backyard Zoo. This guy made it famous, stealing money from me and my little sister walking home from the Catholic. I'm like, what is going on? So you know, the Catholic school, you know, the Catholics, they started advancing a little bit. And the year I was in 7th grade, so my sister was in 8th, they came up and we had got this note from school. They were going to teach sex education. I'm like, wow, you know, sex education. You know, at the time, I didn't know sex was a verb. I thought it was a noun, and I didn't really know a lot about it. And so, you know, you would think, I didn't get to grow up on a farm with animals. You know, you learn a lot from animals. I was completely oblivious of what was going on. And so Mom wrote a note that we can go. And so the nuns gather up the girls, and all the girls go on this side of the school, and all the boys get gathered up and go to this side of the school. And the priests are going to teach us about sex, and the nuns are over here teaching the girls. And looking back, it was pretty silly, but that's what they did. And so they tell us about all the birds and bees and all this. And I still remember, I asked a lot of dumb questions in the class, but going home, and here's my sister and I, we're walking home after sex education day. And here we are, coming from a family of 11 kids, and we were just taught about sex. And, you know, we're kicking the can down the sidewalk. We don't go down the alley anymore because I don't want to mess with that, the zoo guy. And we're kicking the can down, you know, and I go, did you go to that sex education thing today? And, you know, she goes, yeah, I did. And we're kicking the can. I go, did they talk to you? And she goes, yeah. And I go, do you think mom and dad, like, ever, like, you know, and I still remember the look. We both looked at each other and go, nah, and, you know, we just kicked our can down the street and went home and just enjoyed ourselves. Thank you very much.